Hello, everyone. Welcome to Community Bookstore's virtual event series. My name is Noah Mintz. I'm the store's event coordinator, and Community is celebrating over 50 years of business. We do credit the continued support of readers and writers for this milestone. So thank you all for spending the evening with us. I'm very thrilled today to welcome Mark Haber to celebrate his newest novel, St. Sebastian's Abyss, which is out now from Coffee House Press and in conversation with Hilary Leichter. Now, to some housekeeping before I introduce our guests, we've enabled Zoom's auto transcribe setting. So if your version of Zoom is up to date, click on the live transcription button at the bottom of your screen to enable closed captions. If you have any questions for our guests, please click on the Q&A button, which is also at the bottom of your screen to submit them. We will be asking those at the end of the program, so please don't be shy. There's also a chat box through which I'll be posting a link to buy tonight's book if you haven't already. And one caveat for tonight is that we're all at the mercy of our home internet connections, so do bear with any technical issues that could arise and we'll try to resolve them quickly. We have a great lineup of events planned for you this summer, so head over to our website, communitybookstore.net, and sign up for our newsletter to stay up to date. One that I want to point out in particular is next Monday, June 13th. We're very thrilled to welcome National Book Award winner Ibram X. Kendi for the release of his new book, How to Raise an Anti-Racist, in person at Congregation Beth Elohim here in Brooklyn, and in conversation with Mira Jacob. If you're joining us from farther afield tonight, that same night, we'll be hosting a virtual event with Jessie Yazewska-Stevens, who will be discussing her novel, The Visitors, with recent Pulitzer Prize winner Joshua Cohen. Both of those programs are up on our website now and taking registrations. So now, without any further ado, a little about our guests tonight, and we will get started. Mark Haber is the author of the 2008 short story collection Deathbed Conversions and the novel Reinhardt's Garden, which was longlisted for the 2020 PEN Hemingway Award. He's also a fellow bookseller. He is the operations manager at Brazos Bookstore in Houston, Texas. His nonfiction has appeared in the Rumpus, Music and Literature, and LitHub. His fiction has appeared in Southwest Review and Air/Light. And Hilary Leichter is the author of the novel Temporary, which was shortlisted for the Center for Fiction First Novel Prize and longlisted for the PEN Hemingway Award. Her writing has appeared in N+1, The New Yorker, Harper's, The New York Times, Conjunctions, and Selected Shorts. And she's been awarded fellowships from Yaddo, the Folger Shakespeare Library, and the New York Foundation for the Arts. She's currently serving as the summer 2022 Picador Guest Professor for Literature at Leipzig University. And Hilary teaches at Columbia University and lives here in Brooklyn, but she's joining us tonight from Germany. Her next two novels are forthcoming from Ecco. So now, without any further ado, I will leave it to you two. Mark, Hilary, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Noah. Yeah, and thank you, Community Bookstore. And thank you, Hilary, so much. I'm so glad you could join us from Germany.
Thank you so much for having me, Mark. This book is a joy. And to everyone here tonight, if you haven't already bought your copy and want to laugh until you cry for 2 hours straight, buy a copy now. It's a delight. And I think, are you okay with reading just a couple pages for us from the beginning?
Yeah, I am. I was going back and forth. I always say, I've got this kind of manic energy, and people who know me know it comes from a good place. No one's like on edge going, is he okay? But yeah, I am going to read just probably the opening 2, maybe 3 chapters, and then we'll talk about St. Sebastian's Abyss. So for anyone who has not read the book, it's really a simple premise. It's just about 2 art critics who've had a falling out, and one is called to the deathbed of his good friend, the other critic, who lives in Berlin. And so the book is looking back at their friendship during the flight that the unnamed narrator is taking to Berlin. And I guess without further ado, I will read a little bit of St. Sebastian's Abyss. After reading the email from Schmidt, I knew I'd have to fly to see Schmidt on his deathbed in Berlin. After rereading and reflecting on the more emphatic passages of his relatively short email, I was convinced I'd have to visit Schmidt one last time as he lay, in his words, dying in Berlin. Although we hadn't spoken in years, the email, sparse and cruel, hadn't surprised me. It felt suspended, as if it had been written years before and was merely waiting for me to open and read it. The tone of Schmidt's email hadn't surprised me either. Schmidt had been my best friend and confidant, my spiritual companion in art history, and art criticism. Our interests drawn to the Northern Renaissance, specifically Dutch mannerism, and more specifically than that, the painting St. Sebastian's Abyss by Count Hugo Beckenbauer. St. Sebastian's Abyss, the focus of both our early studies and later our entire careers. Schmidt's guidance and affection and later our deep friendship were founded on our mutual love and adoration for St. Sebastian's Abyss, at the time a little-known work by the little-known artist, hence all the more moving. We'd taken countless trips to Barcelona, where St. Sebastian's Abyss was and still is on display, along with Beckenbauer's two lesser works. In Barcelona, we beheld St. Sebastian's Abyss in person, the first time to make sure the obsession we shared was authentic, and every visit thereafter because of the obsession itself. I read and reread Schmidt's relatively short email, going as far as printing it so I could underline specific passages during the long flight to Berlin. I printed 3 copies, in fact, 2 for the flight and 1 to tuck in my luggage in the event of some mild misfortune, spilled coffee, a tear, pages forgotten in the restroom, and so on. I remembered I could always print a copy at the hotel in Berlin, and for a moment felt silly. But this feeling passed because it would be absurd not to print something as vital as the deathbed missive from my spiritual and artistic confidant when I had the means at my disposal. Thus, I printed 3 copies to read and underline, fold and unfold, disregard entirely if I felt like it. The choice was mine, the point being to have a choice. For I saw the next 12 hours as torment, soaring over the Atlantic, condemned to the solitude of my own thoughts, no desire to read anything but the email, wholly occupied with studying, analyzing, construing all 9 pages of Schmidt's relatively terse email. An email that, by the time we descended over Berlin, would no doubt be dog-eared and worn, pondered over and vigorously scrutinized, because I hadn't spoken to my best friend, meaning Schmidt, in over 10 years, 13 to be exact. And Schmidt, being Schmidt, the less he said, the more he revealed about art criticism, our once brilliant devotion to each other, and our subsequent falling out, and naturally, the most sublime painting in human history, St. Sebastian's Abyss. Our decades-long friendship had crumbled when I'd said that horrible thing. What at the time I thought to be mild and innocuous, merely an opinion, was indeed, Schmidt was happy to tell me and later remind me, a horrible thing, a stain on my relatively scandal-free career, a major blunder and indiscretion that wouldn't be easily forgiven. I not only said that horrible thing, he said, but written it too, in my 4th book, Serpent's Pastoral, an exploration of the mythological imagery in St. Sebastian's Abyss. And Schmidt took me to task for both writing and saying that horrible thing, later declaring, almost happily, that horrible thing I'd said and then written would follow me for the rest of my career, which, in his opinion, had a rapidly approaching date of expiration. This didn't happen, and whatever Schmidt believed was horrible about that horrible thing I'd said and then written went largely unnoticed by academics, critics, artists, even our friends. Moreover, the esteem with which my opinions were held only grew. And the more acclaim I received, the more Schmidt resented that horrible thing I'd said and then written regarding the most radiant painting in human history, St. Sebastian's Abyss. Something I couldn't take back, he insisted, since it was in writing too, in my 4th book, Serpent's Pastoral, and rehashed in my 5th book, Harlequin's Affection. I went on to write a 6th, 7th, and 8th book, all popular and all dissecting different aspects of St. Sebastian's Abyss, that glorious painting that had brought Schmidt and me together, and likewise torn our friendship apart. And that is how the book begins, with a lot of, I want to make sure the reader knows what the name of the painting is. I
Could
don't
you
want
say
them...
it one more time for the cheap seats?
Yes, St. Sebastian. Yes, so.
I love so much about that opening, and it's also a great, you do such a great job of teaching the reader how these people think. And something about the cadence of those opening chapters, the repetition, but it's not just repetition, right? It's like each time he goes back to the email, we learn a little bit more about the email. We learn that there are 3 copies of the email. We learn that it's, dog-eared and underlined, and that it's not a short email at all. It's 9 pages long. And so I was thinking about the cadence of your sentences and how they so brilliantly mimic brushstrokes, the kind of aggregation of paint on a canvas, and the way that the form of the book follows the art. The way that these 2 critics follow this painting is just really beautiful.
Thank you, Hilary. That's wonderful. That's when I try and think about my writing, or just writing in general, or when I'm trying to write, I always equate it to either music or painting. I mean, other writers, of course, but I definitely see it in terms of painting, even though I don't have an artistic bone in my body. I can't paint or scribble, but it really is and maybe this happens to you when you're writing, or you get an idea. I might be in bed and I have an idea and I scratch out a detail. And in my mind, I equate that to a color. Like, okay, I need in that chapter, this detail, the equivalent in writing would be a word, is a little bit of charcoal, a little bit of red. So yeah, I think I try and do that just unconsciously.
That's fascinating. Yeah, I think I'm more sonically inclined than
Yeah,
I think more in terms of music, but I think that these two ways of thinking about sentences is interesting because one of the hardest things you can do in a book is describe music or describe visual art.
yeah.
And yet I think you both skirt the issue and do it marvelously. I'm wondering if you could just start off talking a little bit about what compelled you to write about art. What was the seed for what? Because we should say Saint Sebastian's Abyss is not a painting that exists. This is an
Right,
invention. This is a
right.
Mark Haber original. So why this type of art? Why art in general?
I think part of it is because I've read a lot of fiction in the last 3 or 4 years that really delved into art, writing about art, and I don't think any of the books were similar to mine, but they informed my book. I mean, I think my book is similar to Bernhard, Old Masters, and he's all over my writing as an influence. But there's so many other books where something about it. I don't know when the germ or the nugget of the idea came about writing about a painting. But suddenly there it was, and I just kind of sprinted. I wrote the book fairly quickly, and it was really shortly after Saint Sebastian. Listen, it was shortly after Reinhardt's Garden, and I just had this idea, and I kind of chased it. But I know that I was really informed by a lot of books that had come out in the last few years that were about art, and this was kind of my take on art. And of course, it goes into so many other things, whether it's gatekeeping and taste and elitism. But I can't really recall. What that kind of nugget of the idea, what the birth was, but I wanted to write about art, yeah, about a painting and about obsession.
And it's wonderful because the painting becomes this kind of black hole at the center of the narrative that we
Yeah,
never get to see it. We get to see it in fragments, and that's another great source of comedy in the book, just the revelation that, oh, there's a donkey in the corner, or oh, the apostles, or it keeps expanding as if it's never ending.
right.
And we don't get just like a one-page description of this is what's in the painting. We have to
Yeah,
learn about it in pieces. But I love the idea of a piece of art as kind of the thing around which a narrative revolves, and in that way you don't actually have to show it.
yeah, and
Which is
exactly. And no, and
yeah.
what you said is exactly right earlier about that. There's specific concrete items in the painting or objects. There's disciples and a cliff, and there's the holy donkey, of course. And I think there's vines on a cliff face.
Yes.
So it is that mix of there's concrete things that are mentioned, but yet if the reader wants to try and put it together, I don't think you really see anything. I think that's left to their imagination, the reader's imagination. And I also wanted it to be very, very small. It's a very tiny painting, and hopefully that kind of exaggerates the absurdity that these two men, their world revolves around this thing that is fairly small in stature.
Yes. It's very small, but like in my mind, they're in the
Yeah,
painting somehow too.
yeah,
Like the
yeah.
painting is all like Schmidt is in the corner, the narrator is on the other side, and they just haven't noticed themselves yet on the
Yes,
canvas.
yeah.
Um, the book is about criticism, but it's also a love triangle between these two men and a painter who died 400, 500 years ago. And
Yeah,
it's also kind of a psychological thriller, and it's also a mystery, and it's also a historical document. Um,
thank you.
how were you thinking about genre when you were writing this, or were you at all? Did it all just have to be in there?
No, no, it's funny. I really was because I say it a lot, but you kind of are the writer you are, and you can take influences and when it comes back out through your pen or your keyboard, inevitably it's going to be you. So I was really I love books that are very fragmented. You know, when Reinhardt's Garden was one unbroken paragraph, it's like a wall of text. And I wanted to do something that was a little bit more kind of the polar opposite. So there's all these books now, like collections of essays, and these books that kind of hug different genres. They're kind of memoir, they're maybe essays, or maybe fiction that are written in little fragments. So I remember reading The White Dress, part of that trilogy. Dorothy Project publishes it, and I'm going blank on the French author's name. Her name is, but it's written in small fragments. And me attempting to do that, it's no matter what, it's going to be me. So it's me kind of wanting to try a different stylistic thing. And at the end of the day, it's still just a weird, silly Mark Haber, whatever. So there were lots of things that were kind of stylistically influential when I was writing it, but yet it's weird because I don't think you can see that, you know? In all these books about art, Asunder by Chloe Origes, a Mexican author, she writes in English, and Delicacy by Amina Kane. These are books that I loved. And even though the reader who may have read both books doesn't see it, they really are in that book, you know, kind of the world of art.
I'm just gonna like hold up one of the pages and just so that people can see, because it almost is like each chapter. Geez, I can't do this.
You're great.
Like each tiny chapter is like a painting in itself, or like a museum placard. I got the feeling reading each fragment as if I got the feeling of walking around a museum, kind of. And I think it's so fascinating that came first and then kind of led you to the story.
And hats off, as you know, to Coffee House, because I mean, we edited the book, obviously, but the way it is written is how it is. There was no indentations, there's just blocks of text, which something weird about it appeals to me. I love kind of blocks of text. And there was never the issue of making it different or changing it, didn't come up once. So, I mean, of course, hats off to them.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
So I want to talk a little bit about Schmidt and the narrator and their friendship. And it's, you know, you all heard a little bit of it in that opening passage, but it's this kind of frenemy. But that doesn't cover it. They're, you know, they're each other's nemesis. They're each other's soulmate. They're intellectual companions. I mean, it's such a fantastic relationship, and it reminds me of the way that I feel about a lot of my artist friends. And so does this kind of friendship feel foreign to you, or were you writing into something that is your experience being a writer?
I think it's my experience as far as friends, especially maybe the high school years. But what I mean by that is that I think it's my experience, but kind of amped up to a much higher volume. Because, but you know, it's like it's a lot about taste and who you like and who you don't like and how that's supposed to represent you. And you have people like Schmidt and the narrator who are at Oxford, and you can picture them in their desks and they're being snobs and elitists and misanthropes. And they want to like the thing that no one else likes, you know? And of course, everyone else is probably into more modern art or abstract expressionism. And they're like, no, we're going with the Renaissance because it's melodramatic, it's larger than life, and that speaks to us. And I think it authentically does speak to them. But at the same time, it's because what you like so much is your kind of projection of how you want to be seen in the world, you know? And then, you know, whether you're in high school, you're like, well, I like the Beastie Boys. Well, I like Black Flag. And that means that's who you are, you know? So I think there's those elements, you know, amped up a lot.
And then the element of fandom too. They're super fans of this painting. They're, you know, they have a tattoo of this painting on their butts, you know, like it's that level of devotion. And that does remind me of high school, you know, that fervent feeling of, I don't want to just like this. I want to be this. I want to consume this, you know?
I was going to say earlier, Hilary, that if Schmidt had been left alone, I could see him eating the painting. You know, the guards aren't looking and he would just ingest it. Absolutely. Yeah. And then they get their own fans. So, So
the narrator has these two ex-wives who are also art critics, and they are repelled by Schmidt and they're his ex-wives. So ultimately it doesn't end well. But I found it so interesting that the women in the book revolve around modern art. One of them is writing about Paul Klee and loves Kandinsky, and
Yeah,
Schmidt, as you were saying, kind of like spits on that. It's not smart, it's not real, it's after 1906, it doesn't count. And
right.
but is there some sort of commentary there about gender and what we're supposed to like, or what we're supposed to be which subjects in art women and men are supposed to be intelligent on?
Yeah, I think there is. I think there's a lot of kind of comments, or at least ideas about gender. And I was worried, like when I was talking to a coffee house about the book, and we were going through the editing about the women not being named, and that's intentional. But it's like, I'm not this person. These are the characters, and I don't think they're named because they're so self-involved, and they can't take what the women have made, at least the second wife, a very successful career as a professor and an art critic and written books, can't take them seriously because I think part of it is because they're women. It's never said, but I mean, I think that these people obviously exist. And so it's strangely, not even strangely, they're strangely misogynistic, and part of it is, of course, for the humor of the story, but part of it is because the second wife comes out looking like a champ. She's like, they have this, this kind of shouting match, or the equivalent, in a hotel room, because she's laughing, and he's like, "Why are you laughing?" And she's like, "Because he's absurd. You're absurd. This obsession and this bromance you've got is absurd." So I think me not focusing on them and giving them these titles, wife one, wife two, the rebound, is kind of an acknowledgement that they're wiser and they're better, and you almost don't want to be named in this book, really, so because then you're guilty.
They're Madame X.
Yes.
The Sargent painting. They don't get to have a name. They're
Right.
just someone whose portrait was done at a moment in time. And
Exactly.
I think that's beautiful, and I loved those scenes of confrontation. I mean, the the level of vitriol in Schmidt's arguments about why things suck and why things are terrible,
Yeah.
it's a delight. And
Thank you.
I mean, you are such a champion of writers. You're also a bookseller. I take your recommendations so seriously, and
Thank you.
you're someone who lifts up books. But
Yeah.
is there anything, and maybe we can do like pre 1950, is there anything you just hate? Is there anything that inspires the kind of rage in you
Oh, I'm
that
sure.
Schmidt feels?
I don't want to name it. I don't, I work at a bookstore, and so of course you get a little bit catty about certain books or covers and things like this, or oh gosh, this
Yeah.
writer again, that kind of thing. I'm trying to think of specific names or art movements or anything like that. I don't understand how. I know he's talented. This is absolutely, but it was a running joke with people who know me. John Mayer. How do you like John Mayer? I mean, that guy's a creep. I just look at John Mayer, I'm like, oh my God, he looks like such a creep. But people like would love him. He's such a good guitarist. I'm like, yeah, but he's a creep.
Well,
Um,
that's such an interesting
so
example.
John Mayer. I'm going with John
Okay,
Mayer.
John Mayer, got
Yeah,
it.
yeah,
It's part of the public record now.
exactly. For
But I
the
don't think you
vitriol,
need
yeah, Schmidt level
what
vitriol for John Mayer.
what's interesting about that is
Yeah,
that Count Hugo Beckenbauer, who is the fictional painter who
yeah.
painted Saint Sebastian's Abyss, is kind of a douche. I mean, he's a
Mhm.
sex pest. He's dying or mad or lusting after people all at the same time, usually for most of the book, and
Yeah,
he's not a guy you want to be around. And yet
no.
these two critics devote their entire lives to, is it writing about him or is it glomming off of him? Is
Yeah,
that, how do you see their relationship with this artist who's just not a very,
yeah.
he's fascinating, but there's no depth there, there's nothing there,
No,
it's
no,
just
he's
all.
not likable. And I really was trying to go after the trope of the kind of eccentric artist, almost like a Van Gogh, but
Yeah.
obviously he has a lot more depth. And Van Gogh wrote extensively about painting
Right.
and life. But so I think the relationship with the work is that I think they see themselves in him. And maybe they saw themselves in the work first in the textbook, and they went and saw it in Barcelona. And this is a great question because I actually haven't thought about this, but I think that they see themselves in this artist, someone who is a misogynist, just a jerk, just not a nice person, at least from the writings that we have. And also, I think something I realized when I finished the book was that I think Schmidt wants to say that all art died after 1906 with Cezanne, probably not saying his name correctly, Cezanne, because he doesn't want to have a conversation with people that are alive. And if you investigate things that are dead, then it's a one-way conversation. You can't really lose the dialogue or the argument except with other critics. So I think it lets them talk with people with ghosts.
That's beautiful. I think that's
Thanks.
wonderful.
Thanks.
You can definitely see the way they see themselves in him
Yeah.
in the text, especially because without giving too much away, even though I think it progresses to a very natural conclusion, I don't know that it's a spoiler, but they sort of both become him in their own fashion. And the part of the dissolution of their friendship is they diverge from the painting and from each other and each become Beckenbauer.
Yeah.
Which is so satisfying and sad to read and surprising after this like intensely funny book. It's very moving, I think, to become the thing that you're obsessed with.
Thank you. Yeah, I did have trouble with the ending as far as I didn't know exactly. I was about 70% done, and I really pretty much wrote it in order. So I wrote it the way that you read it. I mean, a couple chapters were probably moved around, but I really wrote it, chronologically the way the book is. And but once I got it and I got the idea of how it should go, and obviously they were going to the narrator and Schmidt were going to have a confrontation. That was inevitable. But how would that play out? But I think it's kind of a comment on being myopic and living for yourself or your obsessions, and when you do that, you die alone. You don't have people around you that you share your love with and hopefully celebrate the things they love. So these are not people I admire, but that's just where my imagination goes. I love these kind of characters that are a little bit larger than life and are very, very, inflexible in their beliefs.
There's a beautiful moment where the narrator is weeping in front of the painting, which is something that he does a lot. But he also, just like a tangent, because it's so funny, there are these two lesser paintings by the artist that have also been preserved. And when the narrator and Schmidt go to view Saint Sebastian's Abyss, am I doing it right? They do this.
Yeah.
They put blinders on. But it's also like the scream, and it's also like, and so then other people start doing it too, and it's just this brilliant visual that pops up again and again throughout the book. But the narrator is crying, and usually it's because he's moved by the content of the painting, but by the end, the painting is a mask for his grief about the waste of his life, kind of.
Yes,
I think that
exactly.
It's an interesting question, do you think that whether it's criticism or writing or art, to devote yourself to completely to a pursuit like this, do you have to kind of lay waste to your life? Maybe not the way that they do, maybe not to that extreme, but what do you think?
That's such a good question, Hilary. I'm very much in that boat of like putting everything in that basket. I never really had a backup plan. I'm not acting like I'm a martyr, but I knew when I was like 17, I'm going to be a writer. That's what I want to do, much to the chagrin of my parents, especially my very pragmatic attorney father, but I just knew it. And, you go through the highs and lows, 20s, 30s, etc. But I never at that exclusion. So I think it's, I don't know if there's a black and white answer, but I think that if you don't have other things in your life, then if it's at the expense of everything, your dedication to painting or writing or music or whatever it is, I I think that's kind of a lonely place to be. However, I have a lot of regard for people that are consumed with the thing that they love, whether it's books or whatever. So that my answer is kind of a non-answer. I definitely think that it's a lonely existence if that's all there is. I think that would be for anything, whether you're a car, mechanic or an astronaut. So
Right, you need something else to bounce it off of. Otherwise, it's just
exactly.
like
Exactly, to have other things in your life. So
if there were a piece of art that would be your Saint Sebastian's Abyss,
oh gosh,
a book or any piece of a song, is there
yeah,
one that's like
that's
that
such.
you're in
I love
danger?
your questions. I love them because they're very hard, but in a good way.
Well, you don't have to. I mean, if it's
Yeah.
too,
I'm on the hot
I
seat.
don't have an answer. I was thinking
No,
about it
no,
the whole time. Like, is there
yeah,
a book that that if I wasn't careful would take over my life? I don't know.
yeah. I think for me, one of them, and maybe it's cheating, but it's kind of a book that represents so much else to me, would definitely be Don Quixote.
Hmm.
Um, I love that book, but not just the book, which I love, and I've read it, I guess, twice, but what it represents, which is the possibility of storytelling and the different worlds that you can build in imagination. And it's a bit of a journey outside, and there's adventure, and I love that. I love the possibility of storytelling. So kind of the umbrella of Don Quixote, and then everything else that falls under it. Whether it's Virginia Woolf or Toni Morrison or Roberto Bolaño.
That's a very good answer.
Thank you.
It's an excellent answer.
Thank you. I
Um,
love Don Quixote. So
I do too. I do
yeah,
too. And it is one of those, I think your answer is interesting because in order for a text to be a Saint Sebastian's Abyss, and I hope we start popularizing this as a noun to refer to this type of book or this type
right.
of work of art.
That's his Saint Sebastian, right?
That's a Saint Sebastian right there.
Right.
It has to have space for imagination in it. Like it can't be like a complete finished thing, right?
Yeah, right. I agree. Yeah. Um, yeah, and then in Don Quixote, it's just yeah, it kind of hits all those sweet spots for me that other writers, of course, followed a suit.
Yeah.
But yeah, definitely a book for me that speaks to me. And also, you learn when you're reading it that we're all the same and we've always been the same. That what was funny 500 years ago is still kind of funny now. So
Absolutely.
yeah. So
So both of your books deal with obsession,
yeah,
and I think obsession is fascinating. I think most books actually do, but it's kind of capitalized and underlined in your novels. And
yeah.
what is it about obsession that makes you create story? What is it that's inspiring about it to you?
It's weird because with Reinhardt's Garden and this one both, I think just with anything I write, I start with a very simple premise. Or I always say it's kind of like a line or even a landslide. When a landslide's coming down, it's picking up dirt and rocks and things as it comes down. So I start with something very simple and then it collects as I'm going on. So I started with this book, the simple premise of this obsession with a painting. So it's about obsession. And then suddenly I've got the monkey paintings, and then I've got details, and then so all these things start to kind of trickle in as I'm going. Yeah, obsession interests me because I think because there's so much comedy to be had there, and that's where my mind naturally goes. And I love mixing high and low, and
Mhm.
obsession is a good way to do that because you can have someone who's very educated and very intelligent, obsessed with Renaissance art or the symphony, and yet they're standing there going like this. And so you've got very very high culture, and then you've got the kind of the lowbrow humor. It's the equivalent of kind of a fart joke. You've got these really educated, celebrated critics, and when no one's looking, they've got to block out the rest of the world to look at their painting. So I think obsession just gives me space to kind of interrogate and look, kind of interrogate. I guess the way that the minds of my characters work, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I'm probably talking in a circle, but
No, not at
yeah,
all. Like, it
okay.
makes a lot of sense, and I love what you're saying about obsession illuminating the high and the low. I've never thought of it that way, but even if you're reading a book that's about obsession with love and not with art, or
Right.
it it's like in the mind of the lover, it's the highest form of, emotion. It's like,
Yes.
it's elevating, but it's also, it brings you so low at the same time. And I
Yeah.
love that interplay. Like, I think that's such rich territory to
Yeah, thank you.
explore.
Yeah, I like the high and the low notes, and if there's a way you can kind of put them in a story seamlessly. And that's also why I like just this idea of having the blinders on and the monkey paintings. And I want that kind of mix of high and low, just like in Reinhardt's Garden when uh for example, Count Hugo Beckenbauer, I'm going back to Saint Sebastian's Abyss now, the artist is basically a sex addict. And
Yeah.
this is me kind of going for the low hanging fruit. I'm like, okay, the guy's, but then I need to enrich it and make it kind of feed the story. So I don't want to just go, aha, he likes to chase little boys and girls, and anything that's moving, he wants to make love to, or not make love, but have sex with. So there's that, but then you need to bring something, of course, to the story itself. So I think it's that mix, and I really learned this from Saul Bellow, who loved high culture and low culture, and I thought he just married them brilliantly. And that's, I think, what I try and do is kind of mix the high and the low.
I think that's great. Um, are you an obsessive writer?
Um, a little. So I'm not really. I'm very much a ritual. Like I like to try and write in the morning. A lot longer on my days off. And the days when I'm off and I can write, I do think about it a lot. So I don't know if I'm obsessive, but it is something that I'm always thinking about. And I think more so as I've gotten older. When my wife and I first moved to Texas about 10 years ago, the first year I was here, I taught. I'd already had a collection of stories come out from like a really small press. But for that year that I taught high school, I was essentially not a writer. I didn't think about it because I was too busy. I mean, being a public school teacher is all consuming. And so I had to turn that part of me off. And then with the success, I feel like I'm really enjoying it. It's great. And my imagination the muse has been kind. I am a little bit obsessive. So I really try and carve out time. I'm a little bit selfish and try and find time. So I'm a little obsessive, but not to the extent or the expense of like my marriage or anything like that. I remember to feed the cat, things like that. Yeah. But I guess I'm disciplined. I'm disciplined.
I think that's a better word. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not too obsessed. So
You're just on top of it.
yeah, exactly.
You're just doing your job. There's this wonderful tiny tangent where we learn that so both the narrator and Schmidt have written extensively about this painting, and at the end of the book we get a complete bibliography, and they've each written over 10 books about full-length books about this one painting.
And folks, please go to Community Bookstore to find these books. They're all there. So
it's so good.
yeah.
And we get this moment where it's like they've run out of things to write about. And so the narrator writes a book that he calls speculative art criticism.
That's right.
In which he imagines Count Beckenbauer's paintings that have been lost and conjures them. Is that, I feel so stupid asking this, but is that a real thing, speculative art criticism, or did you invent that?
I'm sure I think I did in this book, but there's speculative, like, I know there's that book that came out, Ahab's Wife, which is a fictional novel about the wife of Ahab. Right. So I know there obviously is in literature. So I'm assuming there probably is an art, but if not, I'm going to call my attorney and I need to get a copyright. So, but you're right. I mean, that goes back. I mean, it's meant to be funny, but it goes back to what you said, that they're exhausting the painting. I mean, they've written about every facet, thousands of pages, and whatever they can do. I mean, the narrator's finishing a book about the holy donkey. He's writing speculative, books about what the paintings he would have done. I mean, how would you know that? It was 500 years ago. But it does go in, I think, to that they've exhausted the painting. They keep looking at something, and they can't get anything more out of it.
And they can't go anywhere else.
They can't.
No, there is nowhere else.
I'm locked in the painting.
What were so part of why they love the painting so much is because they think it's about the end of the world.
Yeah.
And their obsessions are Count Beckenbauer, the painting,
Yes.
and the end of the world. And
Yeah.
they stay up all night on the phone talking about these three things. And I thought
Yeah.
it was just the most beautiful love story I'd ever read. It was so sweet. And I thought that's like the honeymoon of their friendship. He's sneaking off from his first wife to stay up all night on the phone, and she finds him in the morning, like bleary-eyed, having just talked about the end of the world all night.
Yeah.
Is there some connection between the end of the world and Renaissance art? Is that an obvious question? Is this just one of your obsessions?
No,
it's our communal obsession.
Right. No, that's a great question. And my stories that came out, my collection of short stories was called Deathbed Conversions. And my mom read this and she's like, Mark, what is it with the deathbeds? Like, why are you obsessed? No, there is no obsession with the apocalypse or end the world. That really goes back to the high and the low. And like, what could be heavier and more, catastrophic than the apocalypse? And which Renaissance painting, of course, talked about a lot, or talked about, painted or illustrated, because it was so religious. And to have, I think there's a part in the book where he says, we were just on our desk chatting about the end of the world, and so it's those notes that hopefully it's for comedy, is you've got the word chat and you've got end of the world. We were chatting about what was on TV. No, they're chatting about the end of the world. So their obsession, it's a reflection on them, but it also is meant to kind of hit the high note, Armageddon, the end of the world, and then two guys that are up all night, texting each other and talking about it, because it's just so absurd. It's just, the contrast is so, I have no obsession with the end of the world. None. My characters do that. Yeah.
Yeah. I like that.
Yeah.
We have a great question here. And just a reminder, if anyone wants to pop a question in the Q&A, we can ask Mark, but this is great. Was art historical research an important aspect of your writing process? Were you concerned with actual academic scholarship or criticism on the particular time period and adjacent paintings before delving into these characters, the fictional artist and painting, or not at all?
Awesome question. In the middle. So no, I cared about art. My wife went to Savannah College of Art and Design for undergrad, and she went there for grad school. So I kind of borrowed a lot of her old textbooks from school, and I looked up terms and art movements. So I definitely did research, especially into terms of painting, Renaissance art. But I'm also one of these people that I want it to sound good. I want the writing to kind of feel good. So if a term wasn't perfect, if it didn't fit, I didn't care if it was that true to life, because I can always say, well, then my character was wrong. I'm not wrong, he was wrong. So I definitely did research, but it was more for the aesthetics of the story, of the writing and the sound. And it reminded me to use really common words that you forget about. You read a book of art criticism and you see the word foreground and shadow, and you're like, oh, that's right, I have to use the word shadow. It's such a simple word, but if you don't write about art, if you're not an art critic, and you're not kind of disciplined in that, you may forget to write, to use those kind of terminologies. But also one of the reasons the painting isn't described really, really well is because I wanted it to be vague, as I said, but also I'm not super talented at that. So you have to kind of lean into what your strengths are and then back away from the things that you're not. So I can talk about a holy donkey and disciples, but when I read really good writing about art, like some of the novels I mentioned, I'm very moved because it's not something that comes easily to me. So I did do research, but not a ton.
And I saw right before this event, I saw you posting on Twitter that the saints are also a mystery to you.
Yes.
Yeah. So do you find that obviously a little research was important to the book, but do you find that it's useful to leave that kind of those question marks in there as you're creating?
I do like to have a lot of space. A lot of people will research and then write, and I kind of write and then research. So I write and then I research what's demanded of me to kind of fill out the story. So yeah, when the book design was kind of released, on like the internet and everything, people said, oh, that Saint Sebastian's from this era. And if you look at this era, I'm going, oh my God, I don't know anything. I know nothing about Saint Sebastian. It was just the name that he named the painting that's in my book. But I like to have a lot of mystery. I mean, I'm a big proponent of not knowing everything, of not knowing everything to a T, because sometimes it can kind of take the romance out of it. So I love that space between knowing some but not knowing everything. And I research, but only to make sure that it kind of speaks to the book.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I too know very little on all these topics, and so I had the embarrassing experience of, for the first 20 pages, thinking that this was Saint Sebastian's Abyss on the and that it
Oh,
was a real painting. And
yeah.
but that's kind of wonderful, I think, and to have it then taken away from me and
Right.
to confront, the impulse to always have something in your mind when you're reading,
Yeah.
was kind of a thrill, and then it,
Thank,
it became not this, it became something that I couldn't fathom and so much more interesting
thank
because
you.
of
Thank
that.
you. And the cover is a Saint Sebastian that's in a church, I think in the Netherlands,
Yeah,
by
I think so.
yeah, Michael van Croxy.
Hmm.
I think he was a Dutch painter, and I love it. And there's all these different. One of my colleagues at the bookstore, her name's Laura. She I think got her minor in art history, and she said that the first Saint Sebastians that were painted were very old, I guess, haggard men, and so this is him kind of getting sexed up. And as the centuries passed, they had to kind of well, take the robe off, make him younger, give him some abs. And she kind of told me all, and this was like 2 weeks ago. She told me this, that there was this transition over centuries of how Saint Sebastian was kind of painted.
That's
Yeah,
fantastic.
which was very interesting. So
Um, what are your I mean, we talked a little bit about books about art that, were influences or that you've enjoyed. What are
yeah,
some of your, if you could recommend to the people here tonight,
yeah,
books that do what you do so well in here, that kind of invent um literature that doesn't exist, or invent
yeah.
art that doesn't exist? Do you have
Oh,
any things
definitely.
in mind?
We're so different as writers. I shouldn't even like put him in the same world because he's so good. But Roberto Bolaño did a lot of this, and is especially Nazi literature in the Americas, where it's an entire fictional book of Latin American fascists, and they don't exist. But he writes it in this tone that's very flat and very serious. I know Borges does it a lot. And it's something that just appeals to me. I love mixing this tapestry of fictional with real. For example, the museum in the book in Barcelona does exist, but the Rudolph Gallery does not. So I
Right.
talked about the addition. So I love mixing that, and it's never malicious. It's not to make readers Google things, but I love books that kind of invent their own world, invent their own kind of language of things. And so these characters are obsessed with a thing that obviously is fictional, in a gallery that's fictional. So definitely Bolaño, Borges. I know there's so many more. I know we're going to finish. I'm going to have like 10 books come in my mind.
That's
But I
okay.
love writers that do that. Also, the American writer, I don't know if he does that or not, but he's a huge influence, is Donald Antrim. I think he's just a wonderful writer, and I love his book, The Hundred Brothers.
It
And
has the same manic
yes, I
energy.
love that. And I think I read that at a really good time, probably 10 or 12 years ago. And I love books that, like, on page 1 or 2, the writer is kind of telling you how to read them. He's saying,
Mhm.
these are the rules in this world, and this is the world I want you to come in, and this is how it's going to be. Because you read the first page of that book, and you're like, how can someone have 100 brothers? And you're like, don't worry about that. Wrong question.
Wrong
Come with me on
question.
the Yeah, come with me on this trip. So I really love that manic energy and that inventiveness. I really do. That really speaks to me, and it's something that I aspire to.
And the inventions in your book are so deliberate. The gallery that exists
Yeah,
around the gallery that doesn't
yeah.
feels very beautiful. That image feels really beautiful to me. And then
Thank you.
the Schmidt and the narrator, they each have a second favorite painting,
Yes.
and the second favorite paintings Caravaggio, and I don't remember the other painter, but
Yeah.
those are real. Those are real paintings
Yes.
that you can look up as you're reading and be delighted. And so I almost imagine that uh, if they hadn't fallen into your bookmark, they would
Yeah.
have just lived happy, fulfilling lives, loving Caravaggio,
Right.
right?
Yeah. I
But
just
it's
ruined
like,
it for him.
and so the choice about what to make invented and what to take from reality feels really
Yeah.
important, actually, and
It
deliberate.
is. It
Yeah.
really is. Yeah. Thank you. And what to italicize and what not. And obviously, I use a ton of italics. And I also know I'm not the kind of writer that's for everyone, or I'm not in the mood. I mean, sometimes when I'm rereading what I did, I'm like, I really like it. Man, it's a lot. Like it's repetitive, this and this. And I really do like it. But it's you've got to maybe be in a certain mood. But no, you're right. Those decisions to what I'm going to title something, whether I wanted to balance something that's real or isn't, it's hugely important to the story. Yeah.
So just in the passage that you read tonight, there are quite a few moments that are italicized, and they're almost like terms of art that you're creating that reappear throughout the book. So there's that horrible thing, which is
Yes.
always italicized, and this is the moment that ended their friendship, but we don't get
Right.
to actually hear the horrible thing until very late in the story. And
Sure.
so you said that was also really deliberate, what you italicized and what you didn't. I wonder if you
Yeah.
could speak a little more to that.
Yeah, so a lot of it is, and I'm glad you talked about each chapter looking kind of like something you'd see in a museum, because, and I don't mean like, oh, Mark, your chapters are so beautiful, but what I mean is, wow. But
Gorgeous.
Yeah,
Stunning.
yeah, please, Hilary, stop. No, but what I love is I really do see the text as like a thing on the page, and I think a lot of writers do this. So I love that I've used the word before, but tapestry of titles and italics and things like that, to kind of enrich the story and make it again this tapestry. So it's something that I see almost like aesthetically on the page. It's something that I envision. And of course, the choice of what I repeat, that horrible thing. I think I italicized it because it's so pivotal to the story and to the narrator. And then as the reader finds out, it is maybe a big thing or maybe an innocuous thing. I'll leave that to you guys. But
it's great. I mean, I'm not going to say what it is, but
right.
when you hear what it is, it's it's maybe the worst thing ever, but maybe the most benign. It's both.
It is. It kind of is both, right? And it is kind of go back to that high school thing, because I'm really firmly planted in the middle of Gen X, and in high school, like the big thing was selling out. Like, oh man, that band has a song in a commercial. They sold out. They're sellout. Right. And so it was one of those things of like, no, you can't. Like, why are you wearing a Cure shirt? I thought you were this or this. So it does kind of go back to these things, and I'm discovering this as I say it. That were probably planted in high school in my generation, that what you like and what you say kind of defines you. And of course, he says something that he doesn't consider horrible, and that defines him to Schmidt. So,
and it's a betrayal, like betraying the art becomes a betrayal of your friendship too, which is such a high school thing. But it
really is.
But it's also, I feel that. I don't know. Like I think that maybe there's a kind of bullshit tone that we all sometimes do about things that we like or just think are kind of fine, and it's like it's false and it's phony. It's just because we have to exist in the world.
Yes.
But it does feel like a horrible thing that we're required to not be honest about.
Yeah. So maybe Schmidt is me coming out doing this thing that we all kind of want to, but living in a society and being civilized, we just can't.
There is a purity to him and his fabulous mustache that I really envy. I think he's an enviable character in a lot of ways.
I'm gonna walk around Brazos tomorrow and point at books and go, "That's trash. That's trash. That's trash."
But even he is, it's even with him, it's a pose, right? Like even the person who hates everything, it's a kind of.
And how lonely to deny himself enjoying these things that he could enjoy, but he won't allow himself. So there is that mix of envy and then what a lonely existence. Yeah, absolutely.
I want to just, if there are any other questions, we have a little more time. but I wanted to ask you, and you can tell me to shut up or
Sure.
tell me something that Schmidt would say, if there's something that you're working on now, or if you can tell us a little bit about your next
Yeah,
project.
so I just it's funny because this came out and someone's like, oh, it's a pandemic book. That's like the thing now. You wrote it during a pandemic, but this I finished in 2019. So it was finished and
Really?
it had been accepted. Like this was accepted before Reinhardt's Garden, about 6 months before Reinhardt's Garden was published. This was
Oh,
accepted. But really because I wrote it pretty quickly. And so the thing I've been writing since then, I'm pretty much complete. And it's a bigger novel, and I want to say it's maybe my best, but it's not. It's definitely a departure. I think it's very kind of absurd in me and those things, but I think it's a little more tender. I'm hoping. I think that the
did you say
characters.
it's more Tinder or it's more tender?
It's more tender. Like I think it's a little more sympathetic. I hope.
Okay, okay,
So
yeah.
I think that the elements I've had before there. So I did finish a novel tentatively titled Lesser Ruins, and we'll see what happens. I'm just kind of doing the finishing touches, and yeah. So I've been kind of doing that over the last 2+ years, working on
Is
that.
it your is it your Saint Sebastian's Abyss or is it a monkey painting?
It's great. That is really good. It's my Caravaggio.
It's your Caravaggio.
Yeah.
Okay.
No,
That's
no,
great.
it's my Saint Sebastian's Abyss. I really love this book. I hope that people get to read it at some point. I really like it. So
And I think this book is tender too. I
I
think
hope
you're
so.
very
It's
hard
meant to
on,
be. Yeah.
and I want to counter something you said early that it's not earlier that it's not for everyone. I think it is because I think
Thank you.
it's just about friendship. It's really
Yeah.
beautiful. You know, there's a lot of heart in there,
Yeah.
um, under the wordplay and under the obsessive prose. Like I found it incredibly
Good.
moving and tender. So
Thank you.
ah.
You were always our own harshest critics. So sometimes I go, well, it's this and this, and luckily for people like you correct me and say no. So thank you. Yeah, and I wanted to have those things. I do. So
Yes, you're very wrong about what you wrote.
exactly. You're absolutely wrong, Mark. You don't understand it. So
No, and now I'm gonna write 10 books about why you're wrong and why I'm
exactly.
right, and I'll have a
Exactly.
lot.
And they will be sold at community bookstore.
They'll be sold at community bookstore.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Love
It
it.
looks like we might have one more question.
Sure.
Yes. Um, Mark, did you do any thinking about your literary friendships while writing this book?
Hi, Stephanie. Thank you for the question. Not, I guess not particularly. I guess because most of the friendships I have and the people I work with at bookstore or writers, other writers like you and translators and publishers, none of them are very prickly, thankfully. So not really. It was mostly my imagination. I mostly kind of conjured these people, probably from my memories of high school, as I said, and just thinking about the worst, the guy that comes into the party and everyone's like, oh, that guy, So, which would be Schmidt. So no one really in the book world. And I'll DM you, Stephanie. I'll tell you who I'm talking about. But no, no, not really at all. Not really at all. So.
Well, I hope I'll be included on that DM train.
Yes, of
Thank you both
course.
so much for this
Thank you.
conversation.
Thank you, Hilary, so much.
Thank
Yes,
you.
this has
Thank
been a
you, Mark
blast.
and Noah.
Thank you. And those of you at home, thank you for your questions. Please consider purchasing a copy of St. Sebastian's Abyss from Community Bookstore. We hope to see you at another virtual event really soon. Thanks again and have a great evening, everyone.
Bye. Thank you, Noah. Thank you, Hilary.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Congrats, Mark.
Thank you.